Scripture describes King David as a man after God's own heart. And I think a lot of people love David. They love reading his story in the Bible. And they see a lot of good things. And they saw a man who was truly in love with the Lord. And there's one thing that most people who are familiar with Scripture know about King David as far as sin goes. And that is his adulterous relationship with Bathsheba. And so we want to ask the question, how exactly did that unfold? What sort of things took place where this situation with him and Bathsheba just kind of snowballed into something that was very big and very serious? I mean, it was all big and very serious from the very beginning, but how did that take root, and how did that snowball into something really big? What could have been done to prevent it? And what does it look like when the devious heart of a human being, even somebody like David, takes root and starts to take over? We're going to explore all of that. We're going to talk about it, and hopefully we'll get some valuable things out of this. Hope you stay with us. My name is Steve Gill, and you're listening to Loving the Scriptures. You know, in the time when we were starting to get to the ending portion of the book of Acts, when we were doing our study there, and I was thinking about different things to talk about, and even specifically maybe another series, whether it's through a book or something like that. One of the ideas that I had was doing a study on David, the character David in the Bible, which actually would really. What that would really amount to essentially would be studying both 1st and 2nd Samuel. I mean, really, when you really get down to it, I mean, David doesn't show up until in the middle of 1st Samuel. So I guess a book and a half. But even so, I would have still done an overview of some of those previous chapters leading up to the time of David to give us a little bit of background and context and things like that. But all of that to say is that I had flirted with the idea of doing a study on David, and I felt that I'm going to go another direction, and it's not totally off the table for in the future. If it is something that we do in the future, it's probably going to be in the far future if Loving the Scriptures is still around and still ticking. So, you know, with the passage of time, it wouldn't hurt to come back and cover the same material that we're going to cover today. Just kind of moving in another direction and away from doing a character study of David and looking at all the things that he went through and all of his experiences as recorded in Scripture, his connection with his God, and our God as well, also, and David is truly a fascinating character. And you really have grown an admiration for David, not just from his story, but also from reading his Psalms as well. The Psalms are very emotionally honest words spoken from one man to God in musical form. And it's truly amazing. I think that's one of the reasons why people like the Psalms so much. Not only because of its beauty in language, but because of its honesty as well. And people can connect to that. David was a man who was spiritually strong in his relationship with God, but he had struggles just like you and me. And some of those struggles are emotionally expressed on the pages of Scriptures through his Psalms. And David is truly a magnificent character. And so one might wonder then, if you're going to choose to do something and talk about one episode of David's life that's worth talking about, why focus on his sin? Because that is, like I said, that is the one large blemish or blot, I guess you could say, and I feel funny saying that, but I guess in some way it's true. On David's story is this whole thing of his sin with Bathsheba. I don't remember where it is. I don't remember the exact address in Scripture, but David is when David is identified with as a man after God's own heart. It says that David followed all of God's commandments except for in the case of Uriah's wife. And listen, that's not to say that David was sinless other than that time, but I think that what that passage of Scripture is talking about is his blamelessness. Really, in his overall character, it's very hard to point blame on David. I mean, just as far as character flaws are concerned. Again, that doesn't mean that he didn't sin, and you actually see some other sins come out of David in his story when you read about it in the Samuels. So that's not to say that he wasn't a sinner, but he did walk a consistent life of righteousness. And again, like I said, I think when you read David's story, and even when you read the Psalms, the impression that you get is that you're dealing with somebody who really loves his Lord, which I think is really, really neat. So why study this whole thing with Bathsheba? Well, here's the thing. Let me be honest with you. My goal here, this is just one step in something that I want to work my way towards in another few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. And that is looking at what a true heartfelt confession looks like. And specifically, as we're talking about with David, what I specifically have in mind is Psalm 51, which David wrote after everything had been revealed about him and his adultery with Bathsheba and everything. And so the original thought was, before coming into this time and preparing for this time, was to do a study of Psalm 51. But in doing that, before getting into that on that one episode, just doing a quick overview, obviously, of the situation that happened between him and Bathsheba, and then going into the text. But I thought, you know what? I think it might be a good idea for us to take a prolonged step back and just kind of examine this a little bit more. So we're working our way to Psalm 51, but we're going to take this week and probably next week to look at this whole thing that took place and transpired in 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. So those are the two places that we're going to be looking at in the next couple of weeks. So that we can not only just have a passing familiarity with what went on, but really just kind of get down into the details. And that's not obviously in a way to glory in this whole thing or anything, or just kind of get the dirty scoop out of a sick curiosity or something like that. That's not what we're dealing with here. But I think it's very important for us to realize and understand just kind of the slippery slope that David just kind of fell down. And it really, I think, can speak to a lot of us as it relates to temptation, maybe even temptation into sexual sin. This is a sexual sin, and then, people who are maybe feel a strong pull to that, maybe this speaks to them as well. But it doesn't have to be limited to that. If we're just talking about temptation, temptation can cover all sorts of other areas of life as well, all other sorts of alluring and pulling towards sin. So whatever you're dealing with as it relates to temptation, I think that when you look at David's situation here, I think that there are some things that we can grab out of that. That plus we have, just being aware, and I mentioned this just a few minutes ago at the beginning of the episode, just being aware of, at least I think I mentioned it at the beginning. My memory is so short, I don't even remember what I said like 8-9 minutes ago. Oh well. What I might have said is that we see the how sin can take root in somebody like David's heart. I mean, David, again, his life is in a lot of ways, and accurately so, characterized as a life that's lived in righteousness. Again, that's not saying that he was perfect, but you see a man who God saw as righteous, who walked closely with God, who loved God. David is a good example of what it looks like to really love the Lord, I think. And so we might be surprised by what we see here. And just understanding that even somebody like David can get caught in the trap of sin and sensuality and just be pulled down this slippery slope. Now, again, that's not, don't misunderstand me here. I'm not trying to paint this situation in a way to say that, once David was into this, he had no other control over anything else that he did. No, every single step that he took in this unfortunate incident was by the decision of David. But when we're dealing with sinful flesh, I guess here's the point that I'm trying to make. When you're dealing with sinful flesh, the more that you give the flesh access to greater chances or potentials for sin, the harder it's going to be for you to pull yourself out of whatever mess that you created for yourself. And then you have to deal with that whole battle between the flesh and the spirit and that sort of thing. And those things are at war with one another. But, it's the best practice, and I think everybody would agree with me, is to run away at the first sight of trouble. And I think our mistake a lot of times is that we flirt with trouble. And maybe with an unconscious thought in the back of our minds that we're strong enough to fight it off or not let things get too out of control. And that is a deceptive lie from the devil if I ever heard one. So just coming into this, we want to look at what just kind of consider what transpired at this particular time when all this is going on. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at the situation, just how the sin, what happened with the sin, how it occurred and everything, all of that laid out in 2 Samuel chapter 11. We'll probably get into, Nathan's confrontation with David and the consequences of David's sin and stuff next time in looking at chapter 12 of 2 Samuel. Okay, so let's get right into it here and see what happened. And let me just take I'm going to try and cover this whole chapter. And since I'm dealing with the whole chapter, I'm not going to take this time to read through the whole thing and then go back and kind of make some observations and point out some details and stuff. But I'll probably just read some chunks here and there, and we'll talk about a few things here. So, starting in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1, it says, in the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbath. But David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon, when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house, that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? So David sent messengers and took her, and she came into him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, I am pregnant. So let's stop right there for a second. So there is the actual situation. What the one thing that from when David goes out to the roof to the pregnancy, all of that is a domino effect. Well, actually, there's a domino effect even from the very beginning. But even from Bathsheba's pregnancy, as sin continues to take root in David, because he's now got to cover his own hide with all of this, we're going to see a down spiraling effect of just David's thoughts and David's behaviors as he's trying to cover himself in this whole thing. And so it's going to be very interesting. It's very tragic, actually. I mean, when you just really consider what happened and what went on there. But if we go back to the beginning here, we get the setting, the time setting, actually, anyway, which is the springtime. When as it says there, the time when the kings go out to battle. So it's just very noteworthy, number one, where this is a time where it says kings, actual kings, in resuming warfare with other nations and other peoples and stuff like that. I would guess the time that kings go out to battle, I'm thinking perhaps is maybe referring to as opposed to going in the wintertime. Maybe they took some time off from fighting because it's not the best conditions to fight. I don't know. But I mean, whatever the case may be, come springtime, that's when kings went out to battle. That's when kings went out to war. So David, as a king, you would expect him to follow that pattern, but he didn't. Now, the reason behind that, why he decided to stay behind, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think that there's any way that we can fault him for that, because we really don't know the circumstances as to why he remained in Jerusalem. But that's what Scripture says there in verse 1. He says that he remained in Jerusalem. Why? I don't know. Okay. But you look at something like this and everything that comes out of this, and you might think, man, if only David did go to war, you might have avoided this whole thing. Then again, if David went out to war, maybe he would get killed. So, I mean, either way you look at it, I mean, I guess, whatever. But the point being is that in David's decision to refrain from going out to war with his men and essentially just putting Joab in charge. Joab is, if you're familiar with Scripture and you're familiar with this, the story of David and everything and the characters that surrounded his life, Joab was the commander of Israel's army. So naturally, he would be out in the battlefield in this time when Israel is hostile towards or Ammon is hostile towards Israel. However you want to look at it, they're at war with one another right now. They're fighting one another. And so Joab is out there on the field. He's the one who's in charge of the battle on the scene there. David is in Jerusalem. As you'll see later on in the text, I mean, he's not closed off from things that happen. I think that the pattern was that every once in a while, I think this is how you would see this happening, is that you'll have messengers that come back from time to time, whatever those intervals might be, I don't know, and report to David, what's going on in the battle. But anyway, here's David in Jerusalem, not out on the battlefield with his men. And so as verse 2 says, and it happened late one afternoon when David rose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house, that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. Okay, so you have two things that at least from a visual perspective that you have going on here. Okay, so the woman, which we learn later, like I think a verse or two later, we learn her name is Bathsheba, right? So this is Bathsheba, and isn't it kind of interesting? I mean, maybe to try and put a light note on such a serious situation, because it is so serious and so bad, but isn't it interesting that her name is Bathsheba and she's taking a bath? I don't know if anybody ever made that connection before, but so Bathsheba is bathing. Now, what do we know about people when they bathe? I don't know of anybody who bathes with their clothes on, with their clothes on, right? So David catches a glimpse of a naked woman who's bathing. How far away this is, nobody can really say for sure, but close enough where he can tell that she's beautiful, and that's what the text said, that she was a beautiful woman. So, and I think you can maybe take with that natural beauty. I think any guy, no matter what a woman looks like, I'm sorry, this is just a reality for a lot of men. I mean, like a glimpse at naked flesh will catch any guy's attention. And it definitely shouldn't be the case with Christian men, and we hope that doesn't snare people. But if we want to know the reality of things, I mean, I think that is something that given the opportunity, will really catch somebody's attention. Now, you combine natural beauty with naked flesh, and what you have there is something where, in David's case, you have something that is very, 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 very appealing to look at. Okay, now somebody might, and who knows? I haven't heard anybody say anything along these lines. I wonder, if somebody living back at that day who knew the situation, if there would have been an attempt to put the blame on Bathsheba, by saying, she could have bathed out of sight from the king's palace, the king's house, or gone somewhere else. Surely that's not the only place she could have bathed. Maybe surely there's another place where she could have been hidden or something like that. Listen, I don't know. I don't know the circumstances. I don't know the terrain. I don't know if there were some trees or shrubs or whatever. I don't know. So I don't think there's any way that we can make that kind of judgment as well. The focus, though, is on what David did. Okay, and some attention is going to be to what Bathsheba did, because Bathsheba is complicit in all of this too. But the main area of concern here is this is what David did. Now, we think about David and this whole incident with Bathsheba, and we think, okay, the incident is that he brought her up, he slept with her, and she became pregnant. But this had a beginning point somewhere, and it starts right here. And I don't think you need to have the text explicitly come out and tell you the things going on in David's heart and David's mind as things progressed. I mean, I think you can see it right there with a naked woman and somebody who's beautiful. And again, I think the idea behind that phrase is that this is somebody who is just a natural beauty. You ever seen somebody who's, just minus the anything sexual or anything like that? You just look at somebody, and men, and I'm talking specifically, men looking at women, and again, putting sexual thoughts or body aside or something like that. Ever seen somebody and they're just naturally, they're just so beautiful and so gorgeous, right? Even without makeup, so I've actually seen women where they're beautiful and they don't wear makeup and they're beautiful, and sometimes they put on makeup and I think they ruined it. They're like, why did you do that by putting makeup on? But you know what I'm saying, and I'm speaking mostly to you men out there. Just kind of, just the natural beauty that a lot of people have. And I think maybe that's what we're dealing with. So we have that plus the nakedness of Bathsheba as she's bathing. So what's ideally the thing that we would want to see David do in a situation like this? I mean, if we're talking about battling temptation or preventing the snares of alluring temptation to grab a hold of you, I think one of the things that you would want to do, or one of the things that we would want to see David do, is as soon as he sees that woman naked and bathing, he immediately flees. I mean, I'm assuming he's living in a pretty big residence and that he is not confined to the roof of his house. He can go somewhere else. And, he can occupy his time with something else. But just based on how the situation transpires, the impression that you get is that David took a glance, he saw, and his eyes drunk in what he was seeing. I don't think you have what follows in this passage by just a mere glance. And so this is a situation where King David, at home, away from his men, on the roof of his house, looking and seeing Bathsheba and liking what he is seeing, liking it a lot. And so really, and again, just if we're familiar with Scripture and even with what Jesus says, what's that going on? What's that going on there? That's lust, and lust, setting out and lusting after somebody, is adultery of the heart. So really, when we're talking about adultery, really in a very real way, the adultery already happened. I mean, if we're going by the words of Jesus, the adultery actually already happened when David presumably fixed his eyes on Bathsheba and drank in what he was through his eyes, drank in what he was seeing. And so that's one of the things when you allow yourself, or like David does here, to get locked into something like this, you're just feeding your flesh and making it hungrier and hungrier for other things. And that's not a good place to be in. That's why it's important to flee, to get out of there. Because if you think that, maybe just, somebody might say, you put yourself in that situation, you might think, maybe just a little bit of a look. I'm not going to look for too long. That's very unwise. That's a very unwise thing to do. Well, it's not only unwise, it's sinful. I mean, if we're talking about looking at somebody naked, you shouldn't be even looking at it at all, whether it's for 10 seconds, 30 seconds, or 5 minutes. But, David allowed that that visual in front of him to remain there, and he didn't leave. And so that's the point there. And he didn't run away. So as it continues on, it says, and David sent and inquired about the woman. So there's the next step. You'd already gone this far. Now, from people on the outside looking in, we might think, okay, David, just walk away. You've taken a lot longer look than you need to. Just step back, walk away. Okay, get out of there. But again, I think the idea is that when you lock yourself into something like that, you feed the flesh with things that it doesn't need to be fed with, and then desire grows. It doesn't get. It's interesting. It doesn't get satiated. It just leads to more stuff. It leads to more sin, and that's what happens here. So David's sexual desires are aroused now. And so now he's going to take it a step further, and he's going to inquire about the woman. Now, who knows? Again, I don't know what's going through David's head as he's making this decision. Is he thinking, well, I'm just going to find out, I just want to know her name. I just want to find out who she is. I just want to find out who she is, and then, we'll just leave it at that. I'm going to go back and take a nap or something. I don't know what's going through David's head, but I mean, the terms here and how it's laid out sounds innocent. But I think deep down, we know where David is going. And I think maybe in some level, David himself understands where this is going. But he's already on this course where he's already on the path of taking this to the next step. So he looks, and now he's going to inquire. Just inquire, right? And one of the servants said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam?" Listen to this, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. So if there's anything now to the point where if there's any sort of temptation or thought of going in this really bad direction, you would hope that the sound of somebody saying that this woman belongs to somebody else in marriage, that would be enough for David to step back and say, okay, it wouldn't have been a good idea even if she was single. But even when we're dealing now with somebody who's married, she's married to Uriah, and that's I'm backing off now. You would think now with this information, married woman, keep my distance. Nope. It says there in verse 4, so David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him and lay with her. So David took it all the way with the knowledge that she was the wife of somebody else. So David walks into this whole thing with his eyes wide open. And who knows? And again, this is I want to be sure that I express when I'm speculating on things here, because this text is silent about a lot of things. So a speculative thought is, and one wonders if in all of this, David kind of used his power as king, just kind of as a driving force for this whole thing. You wonder if maybe that's kind of what's going on in Bathsheba's head. Here comes these messengers who says, hey, the king is summoning you. And then she goes up to the king, and the king just kind of, hey, come in, we're going to do this sort of thing. I don't know exactly how the whole transaction transpired here. But even if we were to say or think that Bathsheba was, an innocent victim here, if somebody were thinking that, maybe they would think that along the lines of seeing Bathsheba as, well, this is the king, and I don't want to do this, but you don't refuse the king. There could be bad circumstances for you, maybe even for your family, if you refuse the king. Maybe that's what she was thinking. I don't know, though, because the text doesn't say. But it does say that, it does say there that, and she came to him, and he lay with her. And then there's a parenthetical note there right after that whole saying. It says, now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. What does that mean? This is a very clever, well, not clever necessarily, but a very helpful insertion that the author makes here. because now what we know what the situation is, because we know that Bathsheba is going to become pregnant, right? Her uncleanness, her purifying herself from her uncleanness, and even what she was engaged in before, her uncleanness was her menstrual cycle. She just had her period. That's what that's referring to. And so, lest we think that this is just some sort of useless piece of information, no, this is very useful, because if she's cleansing herself ceremonially, and you just go back to places like Leviticus, where it lays out, what a woman is to do after she has her period. She's had her period, which means that before going in and sleeping with David, she was not pregnant. So the idea is that everything that happened with the whole thing with the pregnancy, the baby wasn't the product of her and Uriah, at some time before Uriah went off to war with everybody else. Uriah's going to be going out to battle. He might be away for a while. Got to go in, lay with the wife before he leaves, and then goes off to battle. That's not what we're dealing with. Bathsheba had her period, therefore she is not pregnant. And so that's why you have that bit of information in there. So that when Bathsheba, later on in that text, in verse 5, where it says that she conceived, and then she says that I am pregnant. She knows that it's David's. David knows that it's David's. And that's why he scrambles the way that you see him scrambling. Now, I want you to pay attention to this here, because now sin has produced something where David is in a situation now where, just imagine, and maybe try the best way you can. Maybe this might be hard to do. I don't know. But one thing that I like to do is I like to put myself in the sandals of other people, other characters in the Bible as I'm reading their story. Put yourself in David's sandals here. You just screwed up big time with a sin of adultery. But now what you would have hoped would have been a venting off of passion in a one-night stand, and that's it. That's bad, but let's just keep it that way. Now she comes to you and she says, I'm pregnant. Oh no. Talk about political scandal and stuff like that. That's huge. That's huge. So now David's got to cover his hide. And all of these things, produce all these sinful maneuverings and things that he's going to try and do to kind of cover up this whole thing. And basically, what he's trying to do is he's trying to make it look like Uriah is the father of Bathsheba's baby. Now, how does he do this? Well, you read it later on as the text goes on, verses 6 and following. It says, so David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. And let me just pause there. What would it have been? And this didn't happen. I'm just a thought that just comes to your mind. I wonder what it would have been for David if he sent for Uriah and then word came back to David saying Uriah can't come because he's dead. He died in battle. It's like, a lot of this is a gamble, and it's fetching for Uriah in the hope that, in the whole thing of fighting, that he's still alive, which he is. And he sends word to Joab, says, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. Verse 7, when Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab was doing and how the people were doing and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out of the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of the Lord, all the servants of his Lord, and he did not go down to his house. Now let's stop right there and just kind of take in everything that's going on here. So, and here's the thing: I put myself in Uriah's situation now. And so I'm Uriah, and I'm being summoned by the king, and I'm coming in, and I'm eating with the king. I'm spending time with the king. The king is asking how things are going and everything like that. If I were Uriah, I'm asking, why did you single me out? Nothing bad is happening here. It's just kind of strange. The king calls me to come in and then ask how things are going and everything like that, and then just say, hey, pretty much take a load off in a very major way. Now, here's obviously what he's trying to do. If you look back, the whole thing where it says, where is it here? In verse 7, go down to your house and wash your feet. What I learned is that the whole term wash your feet probably served as a euphemism for go and sleep with your wife, because washing your feet was something that was customary to do before somebody went to bed. And so if we're looking at this from a vantage point of David trying to cover his hide and trying to cover up this whole thing of him impregnating Bathsheba, he's saying, go wash your feet. What he's saying is go home to your wife, enjoy your wife. Perhaps that's what the gift, whatever it was kind of hinting at him doing as well. I don't know. But he's saying, go enjoy your wife. Go and sleep with your wife. And, and for whatever reason, I mean, again, I would be Uriah, and I'd be thinking, okay, that's great. I wonder why you just called me out of everybody and are treating me like this. But doesn't seem like those questions were raised, and if they were, they're not included in the text. But so that's the whole plan. Because if Uriah sleeps with Bathsheba, and then the pregnancy is known to everybody, especially when she begins to show, everybody's just going to assume, oh, well, it's Uriah's. It's Uriah's. Remember, he came from the battlefield. He spent some time with his wife. Surely he slept with her. And so nobody would have even had a thought of that. Oh, is that Uriah's baby? No, that wouldn't have even been a thought. It would just been automatically assumed. Oh, well, Uriah was here. He slept with his wife, and she became pregnant there. And there you have it. And that's a very sneaky and clever plan on David's part. Especially for that time, during that time period. Got to understand that there is no Maury Povich at this time. There is no Uriah, you are not the father, and David, you are the father. There are no DNA tests and everything. If Uriah is able to sleep with Bathsheba, then David's home free. He is. He's home free, because nobody will be able to tell. Nobody will be able to say, hey, this is David's baby. Well, maybe. I mean, if the baby comes out and the baby grows up and then strangely the kid ends up looking like David, maybe somebody would have suspicions. But I mean, at least at the outset, nobody would know. The problem is that Uriah doesn't go home. And I don't know if reading between the lines, we can see the providential hand of God preventing Uriah from doing these things so that David's sin can be made known and revealed. I don't know, but Uriah doesn't go home. He sleeps with the servants of David at the gate of his house, at the gate of David's house, outside, away from the comfort of his own home and in the arms of his wife. Now listen to this, because Uriah is going to say something that makes him look much, much more honorable than David. Because it says, let's see. So in verse 9, but Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord and did not go down to his house. Okay, so verse 10 says, when they told David, Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, have you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? It's like, you came from a long way. Surely you got to want to take a load off in the comfort of your own home. Hint, hint, go home. But Uriah, listen to this response. Verse 11, Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah dwell in booths, and my lord Joab and his servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house and eat and drink and lie and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. So you read that and you're like, man, this is an honorable dude. This is an honorable, patriotic dude. And so he says, how can I, for reasons of who knows what, have been pulled from the battlefield and have been told, go home, be comfortable, sleep with your wife, whatever. And how could I do that while all the other men who I fought side by side with this whole time are out in the discomforts of the open country, their lives are in danger and everything like that, and they're sleeping in booths, and Joab and some of his other servants, they're out in the open field. Uriah's like, I just don't feel right about that. And so that's why he did what he did. Now, I don't know if somebody in David's position, any other person in David's position would have been conscience stricken by that, or just kind of felt a sharp prick in the heart, just like, ouch, sort of thing. This guy is doing something honorable, and here I am trying to cover up for my dishonorable act. I don't know. It doesn't appear to be from David's perspective. Now, again, maybe Scripture's just being silent about it if that was his heart attitude. What we see here, though, is David's like, dang it. So he's got to try another tactic. So what's the other tactic? Well, let's get him drunk. Let's get him drunk. So in verse 12 and following, it says, Then David said to Uriah, Remain here today also, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. And David invited him, and he ate in his presence and drank, so that he made him drunk. And in the evening he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his Lord, but he did not go down to his house. And I don't know why. For some reason, you might think I'm weird. For some reason, this is a very comical thing. I mean, this is a very serious situation. Don't get me wrong. But it's just, there's a part of it that's just comical to me, because even in a drunken state, David's thinking, okay, now this is going to work. Now, we get him drunk. He's not going to be in his right mind. He's not going to be in this whole thing of, oh my, the men are out there sleeping in the field, just kind of, he's going to go home in his drunken state. In his drunken state, maybe he's going to have more desire for his wife. I don't know, that sort of thing. But, take away his normal senses. Well, not his senses, you know what I mean? Just kind of his way of going about things. And maybe that'll work. But even Uriah, in his drunken state, goes opposite of what the ideal was for David in his situation. Totally opposite. So it's like, oh my goodness, this whole thing isn't going to work. He sleeps with the servants outside the gate again, and still doesn't go down to his house. So now this is where things get really unfortunate. And here's where this is not a laughing matter. In verses 14 and following, after one attempt to cover his hide and being unsuccessful, and a second attempt and being unsuccessful, David now reduces himself to doing the one thing that you think is just unthinkable. Everything else that he's done is wrong up to this point, obviously. And that's not to take away from that. But now you come to a point where David, in his own mind, in his own heart, obviously must feel that there is no other recourse. And all of this to cover his hide. Look what happens. Verse 14, in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter he wrote, Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die. And as Joab was besieging the city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the servants of David among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite also died. Then Joab sent and told David all the news about the fighting. And he instructed the messenger, When you have finished telling all the news about the fighting to the king, then if the king's anger rises, and if he says to you, Why did you go so near the city to fight? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, the son of Jerubasheth? Jerubasheth, actually. Did not a woman cast an upper millstone on him from the wall, so that he died at Thebez? Why did you go so near the wall? Then you shall say, Your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So here's this whole devious plan. But so basically what we have here is murder. It's not directly from the hand of David himself, but whether directly or indirectly, David is the cause of it. And so therefore we can say that David is a murderer in an indirect sense. That's blood guiltiness on David's hands. Yeah, you better believe that counts. So in this whole thing, for him to cover himself, in this one act of venting his lust and his passion on this woman that he set his gaze on and impregnating her in the process. Now you have this situation where everything is just spiraled, where it comes down to this. So this is what I'm talking about. We're talking about how sin just kind of anchored itself and took root. And David, in trying to cover his sin, committed a whole bunch of other sins to try and cover up that original sin. And it came down to this whole thing of killing Uriah. Now here's the whole thing behind that. And you might ask, why would he want to kill Uriah? He would want to kill Uriah because Uriah is going to go out, since he's not going to go home and sleep with his wife. He's fine, go out to battle. If Uriah is killed, then I can come in and take Bathsheba as my wife and sleep with her. And this is still early enough in her pregnancy where nobody's really going to know the difference. And so the child that comes forth from Bathsheba, they're going to say, okay, it's David's. Everybody's going to say, oh, it's David's, but everybody's going to think that's after David went in and became, and Bathsheba became her his wife. That's the idea there. That's the whole play of what's going on here, and that's how all the thing fleshes out. As you read later. The messenger, we don't have to read, what goes on here. I can just summarize from verse 22 on, that the messenger does what Joab says. He delivers the message. It's interesting. Joab had instructed the messenger that if David, when you report what happened at the battle, if David gets mad because of, improper military strategic conduct and stuff like that, why did you do this? Why did you do that? Joab had it where he would have the messenger say, in order to calm David down, oh, and what you asked of me has actually happened, and Uriah is dead, in the hopes that would calm him down. But if you read and you notice, in the midst of the report that the messenger is given, he doesn't even give David time to get mad. He gives the report, and then he says, oh, and by the way, Uriah is dead. So the messenger doesn't even give David a chance to get mad. He just says, okay, that Uriah is dead. And so in verse 25, skip down to verse 25, it says, David said to the messenger, thus shall you say to Joab, do not let this matter displease you, for the sword devours now one and now another. Strengthen your attack against the city and overthrow it, and encourage him. Verse 26, when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she lamented over her husband. And when the morning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. So that's what he was after. Since all his other tactics didn't work, that's what he was doing. That's the idea here. So that's what I explained before. That's what the text lays out there. Now here's the thing. From human eyes and from human perception, this works. This looks like this works. But here's the thing. And David, out of all the other people there, should have known better and should have known this above all other things. Is that while he's hiding all of these things from Uriah when he was alive and from pretty much the whole kingdom. I mean, I'm pretty sure maybe there were a handful of people who may have known what happened. But he's trying to hide this. He's trying to cover up what's going on here. Yikes. I mean, he does all this and he's pretty successful from the human point of view. But here's the thing, that last part of verse 27, but the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. So this displeased the Lord, obviously. David is committed. He's committed adultery and now he's committed murder. Two sins, by the way, that are punishable by death in Old Testament law. So listen, David deserves to die. According to Old Testament scripture, David should die. He should be dead. Somebody should kill him. Now, as we're going to see next time, and obviously if we were familiar with David, obviously we know that David doesn't die. And we'll see how things unfold next time when we go into chapter 12. But here's the thing. David was on a consistent level going against the Lord, displeasing him. And all of this was in God's view. You got to wonder, did David actually think that he was hiding these things from the Lord? And that's a question we have to ask ourselves sometimes. Whenever we're caught in sin, and sometimes maybe we're talking about secret sins, do we actually think that we're doing these things? If we're doing these things behind closed doors, whatever the sin might be, behind closed doors, out of sight of other people, where people don't know or they can't find out, do we actually think that we're actually hiding anything from God, who sees everything? I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, if you really think about it. We go out of our way to hide things from people who are not omnipresent, not omniscient. They don't know everything. But we do it. But that being the case, all of it's being done in full view of somebody of a God who knows everything. He's omniscient. You can't hide anything from him. So here's the thing. God saw the whole thing, and you better believe that he was not pleased with this at all. At all. So David's not hiding. That's the one thing. David's not hiding from anything. So he's trying to hide from the human consequences and what this might do on a human level. But God sees everything, and God's going to take care of some things. Now David's going to be spared, but other things are going to happen. We're going to look at that, and we're going to look at that next time. So let that, as between now and next time, let that hang in your mind. I mean, just think about that. And maybe the reason why we conduct ourselves in that way sometimes is because we think on a human level, if people knew what we did or what we thought, people would look at us differently, may lose respect for us, might not be as forgiving. And listen, that might be true. That could be true depending on who you're talking to, who you're dealing with. And then we think, on the other hand, well, it's all in view of God, but at least God is gracious and forgiving. I don't, and you might even be in a situation like, I feel like I'm caught in a trap and I don't want to do this, but the pull is so strong and I want to hide it from other people. But at least with God, I know that God is not going to cast me off. We're not dealing with somebody who's necessarily taking advantage of grace and just in a way of just saying, I'm just going to do whatever I want, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, we're just talking about, if we're looking at it from the perspective, from what it actually is, we go all out of our way of hiding things from other people, not really realizing or being aware or understanding that everything that we're doing is in full view of God. And maybe on an unconscious level, we don't give it a second thought, is because we know that God's love for us isn't going to change. That's not the motivating factor as to why you do those things, but it's one of those. I think maybe it's one of those things that gives a little bit of an explanation as to why we hide from other people, but not so worried about what God sees. I don't know, but the whole concept though makes you think a little bit. And I hope it makes you think a little bit. If you really stop and think about that for 2 seconds, you realize just how foolhardy this whole thing is. Because really, who we should be living to please is God, and everything that we do is before Him and in His sight. So how can it be that we don't even give second thought to the fact that God sees everything that we do, and we work so hard and so feverishly to hide our sins from other people? And it's a mystery that, in some sense that, that's just kind of weird. I mean, just when you think about it. So anyway, so that's the idea there at the end of that chapter in 2 Samuel chapter 11. God saw everything that was going on. David was hiding hiding this whole thing from everybody else, trying to cover his own hide. But there's one person that he could not hide anything from, and that's God Himself. And as that passage says right there, He was not pleased with what was going on. So we're going to see how God deals with David next time when we go into chapter 12, and He's going to use the prophet Nathan to confront him on his sin. So we'll leave it there for now. Come back and we'll finish the story next time as we look at most of chapter 12. And then, like I said earlier in the episode, all of this is working our way up to our way to looking at Psalm 51 in another couple weeks, so that we can see what a true confessing heart looks like from somebody who committed gross sin in the eyes of God, as it relates to what he had done with Bathsheba and then with Uriah. And when we get to that point of Psalm 51, I think we're gonna learn a lot of things here. Learn a lot of things there. So I hope you stay with us and stay tuned for when we get up to that point. And I think we'll truly learn a lot from all of that. So we'll leave it there. If you enjoy this show, and maybe this is your first time listening, or somebody's told you about Loving the Scriptures, or maybe you stumbled on Loving the Scriptures for the first time, I would encourage you to subscribe to my show on Apple Podcasts and also on Google Play. You can also follow Loving the Scriptures on Twitter. The handle is @LTScripts. That's LTSERIPTS, which stands for Loving the Scriptures. All right. I enjoyed this examination. It's a little bit... I mean, after you talk about something like this, it's a little bit depressing, but I mean, it's necessary. I mean, it's a very ugly situation that happened here. But again, I think that as we work our way into coming up to that week when we're going to look at Psalm 51, we're going to see the benefits of that with all of what we've seen as a background, and then reading the words of David in the Psalm, I think is going to be very helpful. So again, like I said, I hope you stay tuned for that. So anyway, my name is Steve Gill, and I hope to see you right back here next time. Bye now.